I'm Sharon Golan. I'm Director of Content Licensing here at Infobase. And today I've got Kim Plumridge with me, and we're going to be talking about her film, My Story of Alzheimer's Disease, which is available on our platforms for high school, university, and public library subscribers. The award-winning film interviews diverse caregivers to provide the viewer with insights into what it's like to care for someone with Alzheimer's. Kim, you have had a long career, both in film and television, but always on the other side of the camera as an actor. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to make this film and to make that switch to director, producer side of things.
Yeah, I've been an actor for a long time. I started acting when I was about 14. I joined the Salt City Playhouse, which was this really cool community theater in Syracuse, and a great place, very welcoming, very diverse community. And I took their acting classes. I was in their children's theater. I was in their musicals, and I loved it. I learned so much about myself and other people, which is what I think acting is really all about. And then when I was 18, I came to New York City and I graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And then I had my acting career, which, was okay. I did okay. I did voiceovers, commercials. I did a lot of off Broadway. I did small, tiny roles in film and TV projects. And probably the most fulfilling role I had was playing Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker when I was 19 in a regional repertory theater. That probably was the highlight of my career. And then when I got into my 30s, I was getting older, and as it goes in the industry, the work there's less work. So that was a little difficult, but I really loved acting. So I went back to acting class. And I remembered why I loved acting class, because it's this incredible opportunity to learn about another person, to understand their behavior, by understanding who they are and what they want. And when you understand another person, you're less likely to judge them, and you're more likely to have compassion for them. And so I really believe that acting is about teaching compassion. And so I thought, well, I want to do that. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years here in New York City, but I have students really all over the country and actually all over the world, thanks to Zoom. And that kind of brings me into the motivation for making the film. One of the things that was difficult, one of the many things that was difficult during my mother's journey with Alzheimer's disease, was that often people wouldn't show her or our family a lot of compassion. And this would be reflected in what they would say. They would say things like, your mother isn't sick. There's nothing wrong with her. Just be grateful she doesn't have cancer. Or they'd say, she's not suffering, she's happy. And it would be so upsetting. And I just couldn't figure out where these comments were coming from. But I do know they were coming from, when I look back, they were coming from not having the experience that we had. Experience is a great teacher. But they were also coming from the way the media was depicting people with Alzheimer's disease at that time. I watched film and TV, and I'd see the Alzheimer's patient depicted as the goofy grandpa or the silly grandma who says inappropriate things, and we'd all laugh. So the Alzheimer's patient was a joke. And that was very hard for me to see. And I would also see commercials for Alzheimer's services and pharmaceuticals. And I remember this one commercial I saw where the Alzheimer's patient was beautifully dressed, immaculate, serenely smiling, and the caregiver was also depicted that way. And I remember thinking, I've been around a lot of Alzheimer's people and Alzheimer's caregivers, assisted livings, nursing homes, daycares, and I never saw Alzheimer's patients or caregivers that look like that. It was like a sterilized version of them, and it was very hard to see that. And so I thought to myself, if the media can be used to give an inaccurate depiction of Alzheimer's patients and their family member caregivers, I can use the media to give an accurate depiction. And I can use the media to teach compassion. So that's how I ended up, that's what the motivation for the film was.
Right. Yeah. And of course, it's also a very personal story because of your own journey with your mother. Did you have to do a lot of research to prepare for the film?
I didn't really have to do a lot of research in terms of what a caregiver goes through because I lived it.
Mm,
But I did read a lot of articles and stories about caregivers, and I did realize that all caregivers have different stories, depending on their family dynamics, their socioeconomic background, cultural norms. And so my decision was to include the other caregivers in the film so that those stories could also be heard, um, rather than just make it about myself.
mhm.
So that's, yeah.
And talk us through your choice to focus on the caregivers rather than on the patients themselves.
Yeah, I think that focusing on the caregivers was a way to kind of focus on both the caregivers and the patient. And what I mean is people in the later stages of Alzheimer's disease cannot tell us what it feels like, what they're going through. They can't teach us
Mm,
that. They're not able to articulate that. But the caregivers can see it. They are the witnesses to it. They can tell us what it looks like. And because they can tell us what it looks like, we can imagine what it must be like. So I really saw the caregivers and the patient as one teaching unit in terms of the
mhm.
film. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think you're right. It does create that teachable moment.
yeah.
Um, and so, how did you connect with or select the people that you've chosen to feature in the film? What was it about their stories that made you want to include them?
Well, the first person I connected with was Louisa. Um, a mutual friend introduced us because Louisa's mom had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. She was only 51.
Wow.
And Louisa had just had her first baby. So she was very, very overwhelmed. And my mother had already passed away. So our friend thought that I could be a source of support to her. And we met and we became good friends. And one day she sent me a link to a YouTube video that she did where she was reading a poem about her mother and her mother's journey with Alzheimer's disease. It was so moving and I was so taken with it. And I reached out to her and I said, you know, this is so moving and it raises awareness. Would you like to maybe make a bigger project, create a bigger project like a film about this? And she was, yeah, you know. So she and I met a few times to try to figure out what kind of a film we wanted to do. We knew we wanted a documentary. We knew we wanted testimonials from other Alzheimer's caregivers. And so she reached out to her support group and I reached out to the Google group of the studio that I work at. And we got Peter and Todd from the support group and Leah from the studio Google group. And I'm really glad with the folks we ended up with because they're diverse, you know, and I
Mhm.
wanted that so badly in the film because I want to make it clear that this can happen to anybody, you know,
Absolutely.
anybody and any family. Um, so yeah, that's how, in terms of selecting them specifically for the film, it wasn't so much about me having the film and then trying to make, you know, trying to select them to fit into the film. It's more about me fitting the film around their stories. It's
Mhm.
more of that kind of a thing. So I was just so glad to have them. Whatever they spoke about, I wanted to shape the film around that. So yeah,
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier about it being about the caregivers and their experience.
yeah, yeah, very much, absolutely.
And I also like the fact that you included Dr. Vermani in the film also, because I don't think that a lot of people think about the stress that professional caregivers face
Yeah,
in their day-to-day lives. So please tell us a little bit more about him and how you came to include his story.
yeah. Dr. Vermani, Addie, came to me, I think in 2014 for acting classes. Yeah, his family had, he and his family had just moved to Long Island. He was working at a hospital in Long Island and he had taken acting classes years ago when he was younger and he always wanted to go back to it. So he came to my class for about, I think, a year and a half or 2 years and he did great. We loved him. He loved it. And he was a very good actor. I think it's because he possesses those qualities that good actors possess. He's incredibly sincere, empathic, kind person. And that, you know, I think when people watch the film, they'll see that immediately. Um, and so when Andrew and I were talking about what else we needed to put into the film after we had already filmed the caregivers, or the caregivers had already been filmed. And so we met to talk about what else we needed. And Andrew said, well, we should maybe bring a doctor in. But, not a doctor in a white coat giving statistics, a doctor with a big heart. Do you know anybody like that? Of course I do, So I reached out to Addie, and he was totally on board from day one. And he and his wife, Jayshree, she's a wonderful person. They have been incredibly supportive for this project. And we so appreciate both of them being on board. So we were lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another thing that you and I had talked about was mixing in lighthearted moments. And what comes to my mind is Peter's story about mixing candy into his mother's pills because she really wanted to take pills. And so he gave her a way that she could, I think he even says she could take all the pills her heart desires.
Yes.
And it was very charming and amusing. But I think it also points to the challenges within family dynamics when it comes to caring for a loved one. How common is that? And what are some of the strategies you've learned through this experience for navigating that?
Well, I was very lucky in that my brother and sister were incredibly supportive of me taking charge, of me being responsible in terms of making decisions for my mother. And I really appreciated that. I mean, I still reached out to them and explained everything to them and answered their questions and their concerns, because I always wanted it to be about the three of us together, in it together. But I know that that's not true for a lot of families. I've heard terrible stories about fighting and families falling apart when that Alzheimer's diagnosis comes into play. And I really think that horrible diagnosis, the pain and the grief that come with it, only intensifies the family dynamics that are already in place. So for instance, if one of the siblings didn't get along with the mother that has Alzheimer's, that diagnosis is probably not going to change that relationship. And that person most likely will not step up to help out. And that's going to cause problems with the rest of the family, with that person. It's not going to be a good thing. Also, in terms of, it can be a cultural dynamic that comes into place. Peter, this didn't end up in the film, but Peter talked about the fact that in traditional Chinese culture, it is the oldest son who steps up and takes care of the family when there's a crisis. But in Peter's case, his older brother didn't really realize that there was a problem. So he didn't step up. Peter stepped up. And that was going against tradition, and it did not sit well with the rest of the family, and there was problems because of it, but he did what he had to do. I think that the suggestion I can make, I mean, it's very personal for every family, but the suggestion I can make is that if you're not getting the support you need from your family, go and get it someplace else. You need to take care of yourself. Support groups, counseling are not only a great place for you to express yourself, but also to come up with strategies to cope, and different ideas of how to get through it. So I highly recommend that, getting help where you need it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very challenging, I think, when it's not just you and the caregiver, but a whole constellation of people and feelings that you have to deal with.
Yeah, it's not easy.
So some of the people who are featured in the film are still taking care of a parent with Alzheimer's or dementia. Did you notice a difference in their perception of the disease and the burden that it places on the family members?
Well, I didn't notice a perception in the actual idea of the disease. I think that both sets, the folks who were still caring for their parents and the folks who had lost or their loved ones, and the folks who had lost their loved ones, totally understood what the disease is, that there is no cure. It is only going to get worse, and the person will die. I think the difference that I see is where the two sets are in terms of the grieving process. The folks who are still caring for their loved ones are in that really terrible place, that type of grief known as anticipatory grief. And I can tell you, because I've been through it, it is like one long panic attack. It is scary. It is sad. It is just horrible. Whereas the people whose loved ones have passed our grief isn't any better or any worse. It's just different. The one thing that we have is some closure. We have some relief, if you will, from that burden. And we've been able to move on a little bit. But that's where I see the main difference when I watch the film, and when I was interviewing people when we were shooting it as well. That's where the big difference is. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Which segues nicely into the fact that, you know, we've mentioned this a little bit earlier about the lighthearted aspects, and I think despite the heaviness of the subject matter, you have woven that in, and you have chosen to end the film on a positive note.
Yeah.
Tell us why that was important to you.
I had an acting teacher who once said, no matter how dark your material is, find some place to make a little joke. Otherwise, your audience is not going to be able to handle it. And I think that that's so true for plays and movies and TV shows. And I also think it's true for life. I think when you're dealing with something that is as dark and heavy as being an Alzheimer's caregiver, you have got to find those moments of light. You've got to look for them and hold on to them. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to handle it. You know, it's about survival, you know, and those moments like Peter's funny story about his mom. It's, you know, when the loved one has passed, you can hold on to those moments, you know, or any lighthearted moment that you had, even if you just remember a really special day with that loved one, you know. And in terms of ending the film on a positive note, that was very important to me, because I wanted our film to be educational, but also inspirational. Our film is really about grief in a lot of ways. But I wanted to give this message to people that even after the person passes away, your life is not over. And honestly, they're still here in some way. If you keep them here, you can, you know, move forward with them in your heart. And one way that I found to do that is to celebrate their legacy, to honor who they were. And my mom, she was just so much fun all the time. She just was wonderful. She made everybody laugh, and she was everybody's favorite aunt and, you know, cousin and daughter. And she was also very, very compassionate. She would forgive people for no matter what they did and give them a million chances. She was just extraordinary in that way. And so I chose to continue that with my teaching. You know, I give my students a couple of hours of fun every week, right? And also I teach them about compassion, about not judging the characters that they're working on, to really see who they are, you know, and not judge them and have compassion. So that's how I did it. And, you know, there's a million different ways to do it. If your loved one was an activist, you could start a foundation in their name. If they love to travel, why don't you go in all the places they didn't get a chance to see, you know? Or if they were an artist, create or have someone else create a beautiful piece of art in their honor. Yeah, it's very important to do that. And also, I was aware that people would be watching this film during the pandemic. And if there was ever a time to find light in the darkness, if there was ever a time to spread positivity, this was it. And so I wanted them to know that too, that you can move on from this pain. There is light, there is meaning and purpose. You know, you can take your loved one with you in your heart. So that was very important for me in the film. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really great message to end on. And I'm going to end our talk about the film, the themes of the film on that positive message, and switch tracks a little bit to talk about more of the filmmaking side of things.
Sure.
So how do you expect the film to be used in the classroom?
You know, I think it would be a wonderful vehicle for medical schools, counseling and social work training programs in colleges and universities, and really any classroom where there's people who have been through it, right? Where they could feel support, that they could see that they're being heard, that they're being seen, you know, a sense of comfort, you know. I think something like that would also be very valuable.
And what's the most surprising thing that you learned through this journey, either about Alzheimer's or about filmmaking?
Oh, wow. I think the biggest surprise was how hard it is to make a film, how much time it takes and how much money it takes. But it was wonderful. I'm so glad I did it. I learned so much. It took a long time. It was really funny because I've heard for years people saying, oh, anyone can make a film. And it is true. You can have your smartphone and go, film your dog running around your yard, and that's a beautiful film. I love dogs. It's beautiful. I'd love to see that film. But if you want to, if you want to make a film that has a very specific message, and a very sort of professionalism about it, I don't think everybody can do that, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But I'm so glad that I did it. It was an amazing experience. It really, really was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what were some of the challenges that you faced?
I think the two biggest ones were financial and emotional. I had no idea how much this film would cost, but very, very grateful. I did some fundraising, which is not my favorite thing to do, but I willed myself forward, and happy to say that 20% of the film was financed through the donations of some really kind and good people. We also got free or discounted rates on services, equipment rental, space rental. There's some really generous people that helped us with that. But the rest of the film was financed by me, and that was not easy. One thing I did is I took another job in addition to my teaching. Years ago, I fell into recruiting. I don't know how I just started doing it. And so I've always had contract recruiting jobs throughout, like most actors, I've always had another job. And so I took a contract recruiting job, and between that and my earnings as a teacher, an acting teacher, I was able to finance the rest of the film. So that was good. And I'm happy to say that I never went into debt. I did not want to go into debt over it. And my mother would not have liked that at all. She would have been very upset with me for going into debt. So I'm glad that didn't happen. So that was good. And the other challenge was the emotional challenge. As we said, it's very personal. It was very emotional. And right before we started putting the film together, right before we started post-production, the editing and all of that, my little brother passed away unexpectedly from pancreatic cancer. So I was completely devastated. And then right after that, there was the pandemic, and I lost people in that. And I thought, oh my God, I need to finish this film though. And it was very hard because, I was very emotionally devastated, and I had to watch the film and the footage of the film a lot, like hundreds of times. And every time I watched, I had to relive my own story and re-experience the caregiver story. And it would just be overwhelming at times. And it was very hard to stay objective. And that's why I'm really glad that we had my co-director and our amazing editor, Andrew Duncan, who really helped me to stay objective, and was an incredible sense of support during that time for me. And so that was great. I don't know what I would have done without him. I don't know that I could have gotten through it, but we did. He kept reminding me to, let's stick to the structure of the film, how we want to send a very specific message. And so, yeah, we did. Yeah.
That's amazing. So having the right team is crucial.
So important. So we're so blessed. It's very, very important to find the right team. And I found that the right team kind of came to me, which was wonderful. Once we put the word out about the film, our beautiful musical score was written by a gentleman named Michael Verselli, who's a friend of Andrew and a very accomplished musician. And I think, he offered to do it for free, but I gave him $300. I don't know why. I think it's so beautiful because it supports the emotional journey of the film so beautifully, and he was wonderful. And then one of my acting students, Chad Marvin, who's also an accomplished musician, wrote an original song for the film that we use in the credits, which I also think is beautiful. And he did that in exchange for some acting classes. So it was lovely on his part. And
good old bartering.
it's a little bartering. So it was great. And my students all wanted to be in the B-roll footage. And one of my students was a production assistant for us. So it was a wonderful experience all around. Yeah.
So many people think that producing a film is expensive and a lot of hard work, and you've definitely corroborated that. Um, what advice would you give to somebody who is interested in making a film?
Yeah, the first thing that you should do is understand that it is a long haul, and set yourself up at a production company, because the business aspect of this can be very, very daunting, and you need to protect your film and yourself. I worked with a wonderful organization called SCORE, and that is it's an organization of retired business people, and they give you free advice and free mentoring. And my SCORE mentor, Alan Kelsey, has been with me throughout all of this, and he was so incredibly supportive and helpful. Also get legal advice, because you're going to have to deal with contracts, you're going to have to do releases, lots of stuff, insurances, you're going to need somebody. We have a wonderful attorney, Sarah Reagan, who is amazing with us. I would say this, and I've heard this from other people, surround yourself with people who know more about what you want to do than you do, which is so true. I mean, I'm so glad Andrew was on hand, and that was so important. And you know, as a producer, you have to be involved in everything. You can delegate stuff, but you have to be involved in everything. And I think that it's very important to make sure that everyone feels appreciated, everyone is acknowledged, and that you check in with everyone. And the other thing I'll say is that it is a team effort. I never say this is my film. I always say it's our film, because it does. It belongs to all of us involved in it. Be true to your ideas. Absolutely. Have your ideas and honor them, but be willing to compromise, and be willing, if you have to let go of some of those ideas for the greater idea of the film. Like some of the things I realized when I saw the film that I had wanted in the film, and Andrew was like, yeah, I don't think so. I was like, yeah, he's right. He's right. I could see how that wouldn't fit in, and it wouldn't support the story. But there were a few things that I did insist upon that are in there, and I'm glad I kept those in. And then, we got, a lot of great ideas from Andrew, and how to actually structure the film and create the storyline and the through line, that I think is fantastic. And other people do too. He's won a few awards for his editing of our film, a grand jury award and another award. And so I'm really happy for him,
Yeah.
he deserves that. So yeah.
Well, yeah, that's fantastic advice, and also useful that you shared a few resources that you relied on. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time talking about your film. I think it's wonderful. And to the people who are watching this interview, I encourage you to check it out. It's a really fantastic film.